confidence in economic rehabilitation and people being able to go out again out of their homes. So I think, the message is very simple. We won't walk out of this crisis without a medical solution, to me at least. And there will be phases. I've been a big proponent of, even when there's a medical solution, the disease is awful enough that you don't want to contract it. So there will be phases. One phase of this is going to be continuing the use of masks, and continuing the use of for maybe into May and June and July, while we phase in and hopefully there's a medicine that works, and that medicine is able to rescue the sickest patients, and doctors get together to figure out how to treat patients, and we don't have the mortality rates that we're looking at. I mean, the case fatality rate is always a question. How fatal is this virus? For younger people, it's not fatal as much as it is for older people. But even for younger people, we're looking at numbers that may be twice or three times that of the worst forms of flu. So those are very humbling, and I think we should, keep those numbers in mind. But I suspect that until there is a partial medical solution, even a partial medical solution, the freedom of economic activity will not resume.
I'm sure that's right. Now we've got time for a few questions. Anurag has pinged in to ask, what do you think will be the aftermath of pandemic on psychological, social and mental health? Do you see that the impact of isolation, the fear of seeing mass graves being dug, the 16 million US unemployed in March, how do you see the impacts that aren't economic, aren't medical, psychological, social, mental health? What would you say about that, Sid?
Well, I'll let you think about it too, because again, this is a historical question. How have we dealt with? What was what do we know about what the aftermath of the Black Death, for instance? But from my small perspective, I think people will go out in fear for the first few months, and there will be a new normal, a revised normal. It will not be the same as we've experienced before.
Yeah, I think that from the historian's perspective, it all depends how long this lasts. After 1918-19, the Spanish flu, the trauma of death, not just through influenza, but as a result of the First World War, the Russian Revolution, a sense of a world that was really changing very profoundly. After all, in 1914, all European countries, more or less every single one, had an empire, colonial all over the world, and that was starting to unravel by 1918-19. That sense of massive change, had an impact in different parts of the world. That the US led to boom and the Roaring '20s, but it also saw Mussolini, Hitler, and others, and populists take great deal of power in other parts, because that story of being reborn, of making your country great again, is a very powerful one when you're trying to give people hope. So a lot depends, I think, on how long this process all lasts. But even before this all happened, in the last 6 months, it's been quite a fragile moment for global affairs because of the changing
right.
way that India's configured, China on the rise, and quite brittle as well in terms of its relationships with other countries. Here in Britain, we've gone through the difficulties of a Brexit that was much harder to achieve than we all thought. And there's a lot of movement going on around the world. So the timing of this is very interesting, because we're already at a point where those fragilities are there. So I think a lot will depend on how long it takes. I'm sure that you're right, Sid, that sort of some good news will boost people to, even if it's several months till it comes, the idea that there is an exit from this. But I fear that if we keep on going week after week saying we still don't really understand some very basic stuff about transmission and asymptomatics, that how long people will stay willing to be contained. So far, in a place like Italy, the lockdown has been extremely effective, and people are obviously scared enough about the consequences that they are keeping to their own homes. Food supplies are challenged, and so on. So, so far I think we're doing pretty well globally. It's quite resilient, and but each day we need a bit more good news. We've got another question here, which is a medical one from Pooja, which says, we know this is a one-time phenomenon like SARS and MERS, or will it be? Sorry, is this a one-time phenomenon, or will it be seasonal like flu? Are we going to get COVID-19, COVID-20, COVID-21? Is this a sort of single weird jump? Is this the new normal? How do you see it?
Well, so the quick answer is we don't know. It depends on the nature of the reservoir of this virus. The reason we have a seasonal flu is two things. One is that there's a reservoir of the virus in ducks and pigs, and they're in frequent contact with humans, and there's a lot of passage of ducks and pigs and other animals that have the flu, and that reservoir moves across into humans. That's one reason. The second reason is that the flu is a very unique virus because its genome uniquely is, again, it's like coronavirus is an RNA genome, but it's segmented. And the segmentation is very important because it means that if you get two flus in the same animal, you can mix and match bits of the flu and get a completely new strain that arises to which humans don't have immunity. So that when you say, H1N1, you're really referring to H is one gene in the flu, N is another gene in the flu. It's H1 and N1 is, types of H's. So one type of H and one type of N. H5N3 is a different flu. So flu has this nasty capacity to have a massive reservoir and then do this thing, which is technically called antigenic shift, in which you get H1N1 and H5N3, H15N45, whatever it might be. Coronaviruses don't have it. They're not, so they don't, as far as we know, they don't have a big reservoir that we're in frequent contact with. We think this came from bats, but no one's sure. So one hopes that if the reservoir is shut down, and if there's a good vaccine, which I hope will be around by the winter this year, then this will not be a seasonal phenomenon. Other coronaviruses might come about, but not SARS-CoV-2. That's a different, unique virus.
Yeah, you mentioned bats. I spent the last 2 days reading all about bats, because bats, as you know, the reservoir not just for SARS and this COVID strain, but also for rabies, for Ebola, and so on. And bats are only a mammal relative that flies. Try and understand why it is that the bat body functions in a different way, that carries these diseases. It seems to spread very quickly and through the colonies, but doesn't kill bats. They have very long lifespans, and it's something to do with body temperature. I'm learning about interferons and all these things that I should have paid a lot more attention when I was studying my biology at school. But it's great to know that you sound upbeat and optimistic, Sid, about this, that we will get to the bottom of finding medical interventions that work, either through repurposing effective drugs that will have an impact in either reducing or eliminating, or that we'll be able to produce something that will knock this one on the head.
Well, eventually, I think they'll come in phases, and I don't think it's going to come. I think we have to really think of this as phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 of the battle. And as I said, phase 1 is going to be repurposing drugs. Phase 2 is going to be passive antibodies. That'll restore confidence. We will probably come out of our houses with masks and gloves, and then hopefully by the winter we'll have a vaccine.
Okay, and I've just the one last question before we go. Deepak says, how will COVID-19 affect China's Belt and Road Initiative? I think I'll take that one very quickly, which is that I think what China's done is it's switched across. If you just think only a couple of months ago, people were asking about regime change, whether this was the moment that China was going to weaken and so on. In fact, what China's done is it's repurposed Belt and Road into a narrative of how it's willing to help from a medical point of view. And there are all sorts of reasons for that. There are lots of different motivations, but China so far sent medical kits and supplies to 89 different countries, including every single country in Africa. And you can say that that's very cynical. You could call it diplomacy if you're old school, but it's very striking, I think, in some parts of the world that China is very keen to look like it's doing a lot, and countries in the West are looking like they're not willing to help each other, either through prevention of sharing medical supplies and so on, or let alone giving material aid. So I think China's Belt and Road becomes part of the story now. China's trying to show that its system of how it does things is effective, and it's a viable alternative to what we're offering in the West. I've got couple more. One last question. Here we go. From Manish. The big question is the timing or likely treatment of the vaccine. Please enlighten. I think, Sid, you talked about that. So so eloquently already. I don't think we need to chew that over again. But it's been a great pleasure to talk to you. I'm such a fan of your work, and a great admirer of being a practitioner as well as a beautiful writer. So I do hope